Hey everyone, Make Pasta 10 here. Just want to say a quick word from our sponsor. No, I'm just fine. We don't have a sponsor, bro. It's been a while, hasn't it? Oh shit, man. I just want to say I want to apologize, saying sorry for the long absence. Because looking back at the channel, seeing that it's been 5 years since I posted a Creepypasta story, and you can tell from my voice that I've grown since then. At least I hope I have. But don't worry, this is going to be real brief, going to be real quick, but I hope you can stay to the end of the video. I tend to hear my comments at the end of the video as well, but I just want to apologize. I'm sorry for not posting enough, and I'm going to get back to that, okay? I promise, guys, I've missed this channel. I've missed making creepypastas and telling stories of creepypastas. So I will be back, and I will be doing that. It is the summer now, and you're probably wondering, 5-year gap, and now it's barely summer. I get it, guys, and I'm sorry, I really am. But we're back, and yeah, I just want to say, want to apologize for that, and say thank you for sticking with me. If you are still here and listening to these stories, thank you. I know that PUBG, my first ever story was the PUBG one, and that one blew up, and I can forever be grateful for that, because you guys really buckled down with that one. So thank you so much, man. And if you guys got a story you want me to say, let me know. As of this video for today, we're just going to be going through one Reddit horror story that I found and I thought was really good, and so I just want to share with you guys. And yeah, please enjoy the video. I always loved nightmares. Quite strange, I suppose. There was something about the experience, about feeling a feeling that is hard to find in everyday life. Then you'd wake up and feel a wash of relief and calm once you knew it wasn't real, that it was all in your head. The life was good and there weren't any real horrors to be afraid of. Not horror like we dreamed of, at any rate. Horror films always have been the same for me. Good ones, at least. They'd invite you in and give you a wonderful gift. They let you feel terror and dread and fear. Always, you could step away once it was all over. You could wake up from the nightmare and feel the relief at the end. It always struck me as strange that the more skilled an author or director, the more negative emotion you felt. Whereas with almost any other media relationship, there was inverted. This is why it was so upsetting to me that I stopped being afraid. I think it was a result of familiarity rather than any particular braveness on my part. One can only watch someone be torn apart so many times before the reality of cameras and performance and film sets become apparent. One can only watch darkness resolve itself into so many nightmare forms before the next one becomes just another one. No longer a new terror, just the same old wearing a new face. Games, movies, books, they all lost their edge to me. I looked into some, and I wasn't alone, although that wasn't much solace to me. Many fans in the macabre genres mentioning becoming numb to the scares, inoculated to the invasion of the mind that horror relies on. I didn't want to lose it though. I often wished I could see anew the things that once made my hair stand on the end and leave me breathing hard or walking in a sweat-soaked bed. I was thinking on the same line one night after I just finished another horror. I had been hoping against hope that it might illuminate for some new darkness. It failed. Maybe I failed. To me, it was the same old flair. The tension builds and the music fades and the pretty little thing rounds a tiny little corner and nothing. Always nothing. Because it's behind her. It's always behind her. But luckily she jets off quick and just in time, too. So very tiring to watch. I finished the film close to midnight. Dissatisfied, I turned off the TV and dropped the remote on the table with a clang. It was cold outside of the blanket that I have entombed myself in on the couch, and the goosebumps on my arms from the chills were the only ones I had felt that night. I crossed the room, opened the door, and stared out into a dark hallway. They always scared me as a kid. Well, not the hallways themselves, but the long, dark length of them in the night. A space to transition that was absent of exits for their duration, and unless the light was on, their far ends always managed to be occulted by the light. Just enough to gloom to let the imagination roar. That night, I cast my mind back to when I was a child. I stepped from the living room and stopped. The hallway was before me, and on my right was a small alcove that only held a coat rack, some shoes, and the front door. Tonight, dim as the house was, it was just a dark corner. As a child, there could have been anything lurking in that darkness. Did the coat rack shift? As a child, I would have been certain of it. Now, not so much. The feeling still lingered there, under the surface, under the layers and layers of conscious thought that had been built from years of adult life telling me that nothing lurked in the dark. I might have felt my heart rate pick up just slightly. Nothing to be frightened of, but there was that unmistakable feeling of not wanting to turn my head and look. There was nothing there. I knew that. But looking just felt unpleasant. So I walked into the dark of the hall. As a child, it would have been now that the fear truly set in. Walking away from whatever hidden terror lurked in the nighttime hours of my home. Was it following? Padding or slithering or crawling or stalking down the hall behind me? Could I cross the space more vast to my young legs that it is now, before whatever it was could get me? I would have to run to my room, throw on the light, and dove for the bed. Safety, that we all know intrinsically. In the bed, you're safe, and if monsters should come and press you further, then the ironclad protection of diving under the covers was only inches away. The child's panic room. Not a terror in the world can get you under the covers. Now there's just the lingering memory of that fear. Still, there was the unpleasantness of not wanting to turn and face whatever I knew wasn't there in the dark. Mere moments later, I was in my room, lights off, feeling no fear and crawling into a bed that no longer served as the bastion of safety. Now it was a portal to communing and co-workers and workplace drudgery. That night I dreamt. I thought I was in my room, then I wasn't. But I really was. You know how dreams go. I hear whispering all around me, and the sense that the room was filling to burst with the things that I couldn't see was overpowering. From the darkness, a shape caught my notice. Tall, nearly the height of the wardrobe, which was nearly the height of my room. Lanky and narrow. Then there was light, flashing in through my shuttered window in narrow bars from traffic outside. The thin shaft glanced through my room, landing on white skin, ashen and cracking like parchment. Like a painting that had been seen years of neglect. The figure turned, and before I could catch a glimpse of its face, the light faded, and the traffic had moved on. The shape turned further into the darkness, and a tiny prink of light glint at me from its eye.
I have something wonderful to show you.
The voice granted at me. I woke up with a start. I had the sense that much more had transpired while I was in the dream. But that was all I could recall. I couldn't stop playing it over in my mind. It had spoken with such glee, barely contained excitement, like a dog too small and excitable to contain its urges, but too well trained to move from where it was commanded, shaking and quivering, and just a word away from being let free. A knock sounded at my door shortly after. "You know it's 9, said my housemate James. "Fucker," I cursed and launched out of my bed. I was supposed to be at work at 8. I showered and dressed in a furry and got to work, enduring the gibes, but didn't really pay that much in mind. I was too distracted by the voice playing over and over in my head. It stayed with me for hours that day. I tried to tell my friends about how cool it had been, but never really got it. They weren't really into horror, didn't really like it. You weren't supposed to like it. I never get that. Still, it was the first time I had been properly afraid in, jeez, how long has it been? Years? I spent a long time wondering if thinking about that long lost feeling of fear had been what caused such a vivid dream. For weeks after that night, I thought about the darkness in the house. I courted the idea of things lurking all around me, watching from every unobserved corner of the house. There must be many of these old fears, I thought. Things that get nurtured with our modern life. Light everywhere. Food readily available. Police to call on should someone wish you harm. But they must still linger in us. None were so easy to find as the lurker in the dark. I spent some time trying to see the world through a new lens. Each night when I would go to bed, there were sounds from the tree outside my room. Bats had come to live in it months ago, and they would squeak and squeal and make all sorts of noise. But with the right framing, they became shrieks of pain. Something was tearing them apart, attacking them in the night. They would scamper away and be hunted again and again each night. The calls went from a friendly reminder of my nocturnal friends to the paid pleas of the creature in agony. Of course, I knew they weren't. Rational thought would constantly prevail. Yet now and again, a shriek would sound in the dead of night, just as I was slipping into a stupor of sleep, and a spike of fear would shoot through me. It became like a game. What things had horror in them? What could I pull the nightmares out and into the waking world? Commuting became an exploration of the gore that a car crash might wreck. Limbs tore free from conscious owners by savage shards of steel and glass or ground away by asphalt. Conversations with friends became investigations into the mind of a serial killer that wanted dearly to keep their secret hidden. How could I know? You hear it time and again. The news report turns and stiffs a microphone into the red face of a wide-eyed friend or relative. Always the same. I have no idea this, or he seems so normal that. Well, I'm no better. How could I tell? My friends that just cracked a great joke and smiled at me with love in his eyes could have just come from gleefully snapping his fingers of the latest captive in the pits he left them in. And all the while I would walk through a dark house and feel the sense of dread that loomed unseen in every black corner. It should have been obvious to me, I suppose, because it is. The place I was finding the fear, what I was uncovering, they were all within me. Maybe I lost touch with horror from films or in games, but the things that lurked under the surface, away from sensible thought, they weren't things that were shown to me by a director or an author. They were all things that were a part of me, a part of being human. They were the embedded in all of us from thousands of years of trauma. There was a horror in me that could never be taken away. I couldn't believe what a wonderful gift that realization was. Maybe it wasn't as easy to find, and maybe it wasn't as shocking as a jump scare or as anonymous as a well-executed prose, but it was always there, lingering just a few inches down in the gray matter. I dreamt again that night, the night I had the realization. I was in my room again. At the time, I thought nothing of it, but it probably should have seemed so strange to me. How often does a dream happen somewhere familiar? Not often for me. I was all too often in the land of a video game, or in the wilderness, or a busy city, or a place that was familiar only from a distant memory. But this night was my room again. Outside were the walls of small animals being torn apart. While looking, I knew my friends were out there. Flashes appeared in my mind's eye. Warm smiles ran red and gore dripped from their laughing faces. In a room, the tall figure shook and trembled. I don't recall when it was that I became aware that there was in my room with me. But in the room I was. No light graced the shadows this time. When it turned to look at me, the prick of light that shone from its eye glowed a deep red. Brighter this time, more intense. A familiar dim light shone from the cracks of its skin. Jagged lines crazed across its face. It smiled at me, and a mouth with too many teeth split its face. Its grin again cracked like a plaster at the corners of its grin.
I wanted to show you something beautiful.
I didn't wake. I didn't know I was asleep. I just remember pulling away. Only there was nowhere to pull away to. I was in my bed, and behind me was only a bed head and a solid wall. But that didn't stop me from trying to back away. Right through both. The dark mass of its form didn't draw any closer, but its face did. Every moment it drew a little closer. It seemed to grow more and more excited, and the grin grew wider and wider. Its pale skin cracked and peeled, and the more of the glowing red shone through from somewhere else. I tried to speak, but I found my jaw heavy, locked up. Panic set in shortly after I realized I couldn't move at all. Not just my jaw, but all of me. I strained against the sensation and managed, after what could have been years for all I knew, to slowly pull the covers up and over my head. I woke shortly after, and as with the last time, I couldn't recall much of what had happened. What I have recounted for you here feels to me as if it was only a fraction of what actually happened. But if it is or not, I can't say. Finding all these new sources of fear have been an amazing discovery for me, but I was struggling to find an off switch. In the weeks following the latest dream, I had a date with a lady I met online. It was something I was thrilled about, owing mostly to having been chronically single for nearly half a decade. Each time I let my mind wander, I would find it poking about in the darker reaches of my imagination. If she could ask me to come back to her place, what should I keep an eye out for, just in case? How do I tell if she's a nut job? Do I plan a way out, or do I just refuse to go back to begin with? I would catch myself doing it and patiently reminding myself how silly all of it was. Without fail, though, my mind would once again venture back into the dark lands that lingered on the edges of rational thought. When I met her, she seemed lovely. They probably all do, before. I cracked a joke and the smile disappeared from her features a fraction before her laugh faded. Was it a fake smile? Fake laughter? Perhaps both. Sure, it was insane to think that a smile fading was enough to confirm malicious intent. I knew that, but they always say trust your instincts, right? Towards the end of the date, she had begun to give me strange looks. I think she knew I had worked out that she wasn't just out with me to have a coffee and a nice time. It was only later that evening, when I was alone at home, that I realized how insane I was being. But then again, even that thought was one I didn't hold with much too confidence. How did I know she wasn't there to hurt me? I paced around the house trying to find out why I was so fixated on that idea. All throughout the house, shadows paralleled around behind my back. I didn't look. I knew that if I looked, I wouldn't see anything, so why look? My skin prickled and I eventually ended up in an armchair in the corner of the living room. It just felt more secure to have my back to the walls. That night, I just sat and thought for hours. I knew full well that all these mental musings were just that, but it didn't seem to matter. Yes, they were in my head, but I already come to understanding that horror lived inside of my head. You watch a film and the horror screws its way into your mind long before the jump comes, before it isn't the film that contains the horror. It's in all of us. In me. Stuck in me. The film just formats it. Gives it a ladder to climb up out of the pit it lives in. You were asked if you remember the shadows stirring in the woods at night. And you do. Locked away, yes, but you know that fear. You know all of the fears that they show you. If you didn't, you couldn't be afraid of it. You'd just be confused. So, who cares that all these thoughts were all in my head? That's where they always were. The problem wasn't that I was imagining horrors. It was that I couldn't stop imagining them. After my date, I tried to talk to my friends, but the thoughts kept bubbling up. They all looked so human. I knew they were. They were. Obviously they were. But it didn't seem to matter. One of them picked up a steak knife to cut his food, and I couldn't stay. I didn't know that if he wasn't a fucking killer, or simply just insane, what if today was the day that he finally snapped? What if he had been fighting off delusions for years? And today could be that day. That knife could be the knife. I knew he wasn't insane. No one knows these things. I could rationalize it, all I knew. But when I took inventory of what I actually knew, him being a safe person to be around just wasn't in there. We all tell ourselves that our friends are sound, and sometimes we're wrong. It wasn't delusion that told me he could be a twisted monster. That was possible. I ran it through my mind over and over, and each time, like a calculator solving the same basic equation, it came back the same. I truly couldn't be certain he didn't mean me any harm. I ran to my car and sat in the driver's seat, trying to turn the key, but couldn't bring myself to drive. I walked home. Every light at home was switched on as soon as I arrived. The light helped. I sat in the chair, shaking, and drank in the night. I had taken to sleeping in the chair. I didn't want to face the hallway. Did I leave the door open? I knew I didn't. I was terrified of the darkness in the hall. Of course I closed my door. This wasn't making any sense to me. I knew somewhere, rattling about in my head, that this was all my own creation. It wasn't anything that posed any real threat to me. But a real threat lost meaning for me as soon as the idea formed. It slipped away. Even to me, was starting to give me a pause. I knew I was someone that found fear in every moment. I was someone that couldn't trust his friends to keep him safe. I couldn't trust the shadows in my own home to stay put. Who I was someone for whom real danger emerged from nothing. That wasn't who I had been. Was I a different person now? I kept telling myself to stop thinking about it. It makes me laugh now. Just don't think about it. You might forget about a joke or misplace your keys, but every moment I lived was becoming an exploration of horror. The very experience of my existence was my cue to imagine what terror might be contained within it. How did one stop thinking about the thing that they were constantly being reminded of? That night I fell asleep in the chair, but my dream found me once again in my bedroom, curled into a tight ball. Screams blared into my ears and faces danced at my window. I took handfuls of the covers and bunched fist and pulled them tightly over my head. I could feel him in the corner. The room shook from his trembling. I wouldn't look. The corpses of small animals battered my window like rain. Knocks came at the door. Friends, just here to check up on me, make sure I was okay. The tremors from the corner were joined by a sound like frenzied breathing. The sound grew closer, crossing my bed slowly until it was just above me. I scrunched my eyes closed and refused to move. The shaking never grew any closer, but the sound of breathing shifted to the foot of my bed, then became slightly muffled. I felt veins in my neck swell with the quickening pulse. My knuckles ached, and I pulled my legs up tighter beneath me. The covers lifted slightly around me, and the sound of frantic, excited, joyous breathing became loud in my ears before stopping abruptly. I knew it was there, under the covers with me. The silence hurt and my skin crawled. I wasn't going to look. Whatever wonder it wanted to show me, I wasn't going to see. I had seen quite enough. I could feel breath on my face. Shaking lingered, as did the silence. I felt as though I could vaguely see the red through my closed eyelids. "I'm not looking," I cried. "Don't want to see what you want to show me." I could hear the sound of plastering cracking as it opened its mouth, and the red light grew behind my closed eyes.
There's no need to show, sweet thing. You have seen all I have to show you. The wonder lives in you now, and you found it all on your own.
I woke up, still curled in a ball with fist aching. The covers were soaked through with sweat, and I could feel my clothes sticking to me. That same old feeling of relief was thankfully there for me, and I let out a shaky breath. As I opened my eyes, the face stared back at me from beneath the covers. The eyes burned my skin with blinding red light, shining from another place. The face poured flakes of ashen, plastered skin all around as its mouth snapped open. When I did truly wake, I was exhausted. The feel of missing a lot of what happened was still there. It started to worry me much more than it had before. If I don't recall what is happening in my dreams, how often is my unconscious mind being tormented without me knowing? How much of my unawake life was devoted to being violated by that thing? And more disturbingly, has this always been true? How many hours have I spent in terror, only to have the waking world wash them away? What could that have done to my mind? It said that I learned what I wanted to show me all on my own. Was that real? What was in my mind and what was real had left me as points of distinction. There wasn't anything that was real that wasn't also a figment of my mind. If this thing lived only in me, then it just meant that it was only real for me, but not that it wasn't any less real. That was all some time ago. I don't quite know who I am anymore. I know that a part of me is this thing. Part of me is the mangled bodies of a car crash, the twisted forms of disease and sickness, and the malformed offspring of damaged genes. Part of me is the grin of a killer as he follows you home and turns an unlocked door handle. Part of me lives in that dark corner of your room, and a part of me lurks behind you while you traverse the places where you once thought you were safe, but now you aren't quite sure. Part of me is the man that I always was. Part of me, though, is the being that isn't quite bothered so much that you too have seen the wonderful things that come from looking too deeply for what you know is there. Part of me wishes you would take care with what you seek to find. And part of me knows that it's far too late for all of that. I wonder sometimes if I always thought of these things, or if they only come back from looking too deeply. Now, I suppose you can help me.